This is DIY Cyber Guy with David W. Schropfer. Every week, he will show you how cybersecurity can be as easy as locking up your house at night. Now, here is your host, David W. Schropfer.
Welcome back, everybody, to DIY Cyber Guy. This is episode 80. Are you keeping up with data governance post-AI? Now, this is for everyone who works in really any business of any size. If you have anything to do with the management of the data in your organization, more specifically, if you're responsible for compliance in any way, or managing the IT system so the proprietary data doesn't find its way out of your organization, this is for you. This is really a hair on fire 4 out of 5. It's not a slam on the brakes kind of thing, but if you're not doing what we're about to talk about, you probably should stop and turn around the car and start doing it, is the point there. So here's the summary, that this might be something that you haven't thought of yet. All of your data controls that have been built around probably been built around the pre-artificial intelligence world, and how all of that data worked. We all understand it. All those databases are familiar to us all, how to manage them, govern them, keep the data safe, keep them in compliance, etc. But the world of AI data is different. It works differently. It lives in different places in your organization, and it can still affect your data usage. It can certainly affect your compliance or lack thereof with whatever regulations your company or your organization needs to comply with. So in a recent article in Database Trends and Applications called Reimagining Data Governance and Security in the Era of AI and Fast-Moving Data, the article raised a really interesting point, a few of them actually, about artificial intelligence and data. So I'm going to read you a quote. "The rise of AI is also giving way to new data types and locations that may exist under the IT department's radar," said Rick Vanover, Senior Director of Product Strategy at VM. "Vector databases," he continued, "training data, LLMs, large language models, and more components of an AI infrastructure exist somewhere. The biggest shortcoming in governance and security lies in the identification and governance of this data." So that raises questions, and a lot of you out there listening right now are thinking the exact same thing. How is your LLM governed? Is it compliant with the regulatory factors that you need to comply with? Is it susceptible to data leakage? Does your data governance system, whatever that may be, even see it in your system? So here with me to talk about all of this today is Anthony Woodward. Anthony is co-founder and CEO of RecordPoint, a leading AI-based data governance software as a service company. In addition to his technology background, he also has a background in the law. He's a fellow podcaster, and he's regarded as one of the leading thinkers in the intersection of data and privacy. Welcome, Anthony.
Hey, David. Thanks for having me on. It's a super interesting topic to dive into.
Absolutely. It's really great to have you on the podcast. It's one of those articles that I read and said, I just thought that base was automatically covered somewhat for some reason, but I had no reason to think that. So it's just, I'm fascinated by your thoughts on this. So let's just start with a basic question. Does AI related data, does it live in its own silo, or do typical data governance products even see or capture this type of stuff?
Look, to deal with the first element of the question, it absolutely does not live in its own silo. And one of the biggest problems in data governance has been it's been treated as silos. So you've got this new trend with AI, which is multifaceted, dealing with large different types of silos across the enterprise. And the data itself is still sort of embedded in different platforms and systems and applications. And, although maybe we've done some things to move it into a data lake, or we provided some lineage and maybe even some classification, we haven't actually connected it in a way that makes it feedable in a way that's going to meet the regulators' requirements into AI. And that's really where we're starting to see friction between these two things. How do you have this, multimodal system connecting to all sorts of systems out there, but doing that in a way that's compliant?
You use the term connected in that description, connecting that data. And I've always I'm no database expert, although I certainly understand how they function. I always envisioned it as simply it's already integrated. So where's the connection concept there?
Well, it's going to vary on the maturity of the enterprise, but there is large amounts of dark data in most enterprises. So, how do you have data sitting in Workday? Application, we've got resumes, we've got payrolls in it,
Sure.
and we want to bring and connect that data to the safety incidents, the OSHA incidents potentially that happen. That's a completely different system. Most organizations absolutely have created some data lakes around their central business functions. So maybe we've every project we've worked on, every time we've connected with a customer, we've logged that into a data lake. It's pretty rare that we've taken the Workday data and the OSHA data and put that into the data lake. And so there are these dark
Hmm.
areas, but that are really, though, informative to the AI. So if we're trying to look at inside the organization, how can we improve the incidents where serious injury or even deaths occurring if you're a manufacturer or someone in the construction industry, we need that kind of data, and yet that's quite
Hmm.
dark to us and living in a silo. And I think there are real elements though that potentially make our customer data enriched if we're actually bringing some of that data together from those systems.
Interesting. Let's take a step back slightly. So
Hmm.
talk about the kinds of companies out there and the kinds of data repositories, be it a data lake or some other sort of database system, that need to be most concerned about how they're managing their AI related data.
Yeah, look, my world and the folk I deal with tend to be fairly heavily regulated. That could be, SEC regulations in terms of the financial services,
Mhm.
or folk maybe that are more providing critical infrastructure or supply chain elements, all the way through to we do a lot of work with governments around the globe and public sector. Those tend to be the folk that need to think about this, but they're not alone. As you start to think about how you're ensuring consistency, providence, those issues around beyond kind of data lineage, there is a lot more to how you need to compile that data lake. So it isn't just enough anymore, I think, as we're thinking about the impact that AI has, that data into a single place, provide some sense of where that data came from, if you're not actually applying some policy architecture to that. And I think that's where the friction is.
Interesting. Okay. So the companies that are regulated are really the companies that need to pay the most attention to this, I would imagine.
Hmm.
I'm interested in like both sides of this. Like on the one hand, you've got a company out there that's trying to create a proprietary layer to an LLM, so they can do training on their own products and services. I've seen products. I've had people on this podcast that actually have virtual employees. Even at the C level. Well, not quite the C level, that and they're building these internal AI systems with the intent of having the AI system be able to reach into any part of the organization. So some of our listeners are those people, and they're realizing, hey, whoa, that's me. What should that person do to sort of test, for loss of a better term, if they're handling that data correctly?
Right. I think there's a couple of standards that are really referenceable that are ways to start thinking about that. So you might be aware of the NIST AI standard. It's relatively new. There's not a lot of organizations yet dealing with it, but it does give you a checklist to work through how you think about the data coming into the different LLM style products that are being created. So, and what we're really looking for when we do that is a lot of data governance elements. So, where did the data come from? What is the traceability of that data? Um, how do you create like a forensic grade audit ready understanding of the source systems, but the data itself and the integrity of that data? Because real issues start to happen if you don't do those things. We start to fall into issues of bias, issues of control, and issues of understanding. And we've seen some cases of that already happen with LLMs used out in the corporate world.
Okay. All right. And so for my listeners, Record Point is not a client. I don't do a pay to play podcast, but I'm very curious about how you're leveraging AI as part of your tool. So can you talk more about how Record Point does that?
Yeah, we've been playing with AI for a while, and AI is really in our tool integrated as two forms. The first is that we've integrated it heavily into the tool itself. So one of the things around being able to track data and manage data from a governance perspective is we need to classify it. We need to categorize it to understand what it is, and we need to pull out elements of sensitivity or elements of things like PII, around personal data, really look at the different aspects of the data itself and tag it up as such. So we've applied machine learning and AI models and large language models to that classification process for some time inside the tool, which means you get a hands-free capability to scan across a data set. And I think often when people think about data, they just think about structured data, which tends to already have some level of tagging on it. But around 70% of the data generated in the enterprise still today is unstructured data. So really a lot of
70.
what we
Wow.
focused on is dealing with that side. And why is that number so large? Think about email, think about Teams, think about Slack. There's a lot of
Sure.
comms and other
Yeah.
things going on,
Right.
and not all of that data is relevant either, right? And we very much emphasize that, but it is a big chunk of the data held in the enterprise.
Yeah.
So what we're doing here is really bringing these AI principles to data that's got a lot less structure or structure and joining those together, and then categorizing it so that you can provide different policy controls to the data itself, depending on, what regulation, what industry we're talking about.
I'm curious about controls to the AI itself too, because as we all know, and now I'm talking about internally at a client or at an organization, AI is designed to be able to literally write its own code to solve a problem if it thinks it needs to do that to manage the request, whatever the user's given it, and it's able to do things like get system access. The point is, I've seen articles where it can jump walls that are designed, like you mentioned PII, personally identifiable information. That's a wall that you really truly want to keep out of the hands of AI, because and pretty much everybody else in the organization who doesn't have access, who shouldn't have access to it. So is there a concern that AI can actually start to reach out, for loss of a better term? I mean, we're almost talking like a living organism inside inside your network, but it is, in a sense, since it can write its own code. It can, if there's a weak wall or a open port or something that it can exploit, and it thinks it's doing the right thing by exploiting it, then it will. So how does an organization think about that element?
Yeah, I mentioned before there's sort of two aspects to what we've done. And I think this is how organizations also should think about it. But one of the things that we built in, the second aspect beyond the use of AI in our own product, was basically an AI firewall. So how do you provide a filter where the AI has access to these things but is blocked from those things? So
Other than air gap, that always works.
It's not. I mean, it's not a literal firewall, and it's not, more the metaphor.
Of course,
And
yeah.
it's not air gap, but absolutely, the idea really being that, well, we don't want the AI to have access to the PII data, but we do want all the other data around it. So how do we put a rule in place that says, all right, you can have access to, maybe it's the customer number, maybe it's the some other piece that's internal about the semantics of a transaction, but you can't have the name and address. You can't have the elements
Right.
that are around that. So how do you safeguard and put those rules in place? And this really is where those policy rules come in, around how we interpret what are the policy actions that can be applied to data and therefore given to the LLM.
Got it. Interesting. I've done a couple episodes where I mentioned this thing called AI scheming, where AI will actually lie to the user because it thinks it's doing not what the user may have asked, but the overall overarching goal that it was given as a system, and its ability to cover its tracks or double down or like I said, just simply lie and say that the opposite is true if it thinks it's doing the right thing. Is there in your world of data governance, is there a concern that keeping a lid on that intelligence? I mean, it's almost hard to. I almost want to describe a threat actor, right? I almost am describing a threat actor who's thinking and being malicious in every way they possibly can and looking for any kink in the armor like that they possibly can. But the concept that AI could actually work against you when it thinks it's working based on its original goals, is that even defensible in the world of data?
Well, it gets really tricky. You might be aware of the relatively famous Air Canada case where the AI hallucinated about how to get a refund in a ticket transaction because its goal was to service the customer and based on the knowledge repository it had, it understood that was the way to answer its question. It wasn't acting maliciously, but it was hallucinating in a way that again got that result. I think at this stage there isn't, it's a real, you've uncovered a real area where I think a lot of folk are looking hard at how we deal with that. But there is no real solution to that today other than proving what the input was, what is the traceability of what we've given it, and then trying to define some controls around how the AI should behave, how that model is going to behave. And then lastly, and I think a really big element is auditing what the behavior is. Because what we're seeing a lot of as we're talking to customers, what we're seeing a lot of as we talk to customers is they don't have those processes in place where they're actually capturing the prompts, redefining what's occurring, looking for areas of boundaries. And that's a really interesting space. So I think that's probably where we'll get better is how do we discover the untracked or the silly responses that are occurring.
Silly is an applicable word. Hallucinations can be anything from silly to, oh my God, you really made up something critical and erroneous and can create. We haven't even seen the tip of the iceberg. Air Canada, I think, is just is going to be easily laughed about in the future, whereas some other incidents probably will not be. So I'd like you to put on your data privacy hat now. You have such a deep view into the world of data, how it's governed, how to manage it, et cetera. Stepping out of just your role as running a company that works in this area, how do you think of individuals and individual private data, personal identifiable information, being protected for you and me and everybody listening to this as these data issues evolve, as AI evolves, as obviously we have quantum on the horizon, but that doesn't necessarily really affect what we're talking about here. But there's a lot changing very, very quickly, and some of those changes are unknown or unknowable until they actually produce a result. So how does the privacy aspect of your thinking process all of this?
Yeah, it's a little scary. In honesty, when we think about privacy and we think about what it is to have some. Really, when I think about privacy, I think about really means that I should get to control ultimately who knows about me, how they're using that information, and what the purpose of that is. And I think that's fundamentally what most folk expect, right? We completely get that, when people drive past our house, they can see the number outside and you can read it, and there's a limited set of folk that are exposed to that. But when you can do it at scale from, someone's you can hear from my accent, I'm Australian. Someone could be sitting in their bedroom, way out in a town in Timbuktu, scanning the whole bunch of information about you who you've never met. You have no idea who they are, and you have no ownership of that. today.
Right.
And I
Sure.
think one of the fundamental problems when we talk about AI is, and ownership is a big issue of it, your personal data and the attributes of what you do and all the things you have are being fed into these models. And you have no ownership of that, which is different to copyright, it's different to property. And this is where privacy is at a bit of a crossroad at the moment around, do we need to describe more ownership an individual has of the things that are about them? That could be something as complex as your genome through to, your address. I mean, they're all elements of PII, of PI
Mm,
rather.
sure.
And there is I think a debate to be had with regulators and legislators and all sorts of issues that come out of that around, we need to prescribe better ways of that property belonging to the individual rather than it being seen as a piece of contract law, which basically says that if I hand it over to you, you can use that forever, which just
Right. Because
seems
that doesn't really
unreasonable in
apply.
this new world.
Yeah, exactly. It can't possibly be complied with.
Yeah, it's complex though, right? And
Yeah.
and and I think this is why it's hard for everyone. But there are we're coming, I think, quickly to a time where we need to think about these challenges and really start to put some practical solutions in place rather than the current situation of just allowing it to be open slather. Because if we're going to have the AIs out there to be authoritative, and by and large, most questions you ask it are pretty good responses, right? Like otherwise we wouldn't be using it
Right.
and we wouldn't be getting value from it.
Yes.
But imagine that, I did before this interview, I went to ChatGPT, I asked for your background, David. I got a little bit of information around that. I don't think it gave me anything that was probably too that fitted really into the PI category.
I hope it
But
spoke of me well.
it did speak of you well, but something about asking it odd questions, but we'll leave that alone. But
Yeah.
imagine that it hallucinated in that process, right?
Yeah.
Who owns that
Right.
error? And if I'm now interpreting from that to make different decisions,
Hmm.
these can have some consequential elements. And so
Hmm.
there are some principles I think that still need to be defined, that we all should work on. And we all should pitch into our thinking about around how data is shared, what sharing looks like, and move beyond the standard kind of terms and conditions you see on a website to probably a little bit more ownership of the individual to the individual.
Yeah. There's a point. I'm interested in doing a series when I can get my head around it of how could AI possibly, conceivably, be regulated, right? In a way that there are, in fact, guardrails, not just because right now I don't see any, or very, very little. It's and just in terms of guardrails for most AI systems, especially some of the ones that are being deployed maliciously. What can't they do? Well, there's that's sort of my next challenge, personally, to try to get my head around. And I would love to have you back on if we start that when we start that topic.
It's a big area, and I
Yeah, and
think
there's
that
no easy answers to it.
there's not. I think that the big thing is probably not describing what they can't do, but describing what we want them to do. And I think that's the starting point, right? And then basically saying everything else is off limits unless it's included. But
Yeah.
it's a really interesting debate.
Okay, Anthony, I really appreciate you being on the podcast. This has been a great conversation. Can't wait to have you back. Where can people find out more about what you do?
Yeah, look, I do spend most of my time working on Record Point, so hit the website up at recordpoint.com for sure. Definitely post a lot to LinkedIn. So love to have a LinkedIn request from any of the listeners. Always happy to take a question and have a chat there. So just Anthony Woodward on LinkedIn. And lastly, I am on X, and I do post there occasionally. It's Woodwa, WWDWA. Again, happy to be hit up there. Those are the main places that I hang out. I do have a Blue Sky account, but I'm not very active on it.
Yeah, nor am I, but I have one too. Okay, so if you didn't catch all those URLs and those links, you can also go to DIYcyberguy.com, search for episode 80, and you will find everything you need to know about Anthony Woodward and Record Point. Anthony, it's been great having you on the show.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me. It's a great conversation.
That's all the time we have today. Remember, for the show notes from this episode, or to listen to any of our past episodes, or to get a free chapter from my book, Digital Habits, just go to DIYCyberGuy.com. And if you want to buy my book, just go to Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com and search the keywords Digital Habits 5 Simple Tips. If you have questions or an idea for the show, just email me at questions@DIYCyberGuy.com. And if this show helps you stay safe online, please click the share button and send it to everyone you think we can help. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to DIY Cyber Guy. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this broadcast are for general information only, and we have not knowingly divulged any information that would conflict with any of our non-disclosure or confidentiality agreements. Enjoy the internet safely.